My name is Elena Brooks. I am 34 years old, and until the day my grandfather died, I thought I understood my family. I was wrong. If you had walked into Grandpa Walter's funeral, you would have believed we were the happiest family in town. My cousins hugged each other. My uncles shook hands with neighbors. My aunt cried into a spotless white handkerchief while people whispered about what a wonderful man Grandpa had been. But I knew something they didn't. The smiles in my family always disappeared when money entered the room. Grandpa Walter never cared much about expensive things. He drove the same old pickup truck for almost 25 years. His house was small, his clothes were simple, and his favorite chair had been repaired so many times that it looked more like patches than fabric. Still, everyone believed he had saved a fortune. That belief changed the way people treated him during the last few years of his life. My cousins suddenly visited every weekend. They brought fancy cakes he never ate. They laughed at jokes that were not funny. Welcome to a new video. I hope you'll enjoy the story. Share your city name from where you are watching me in the comments section. Thanks. Now let's get back to the story. They called him the greatest grandpa in the world. I visited because he was lonely. Sometimes we sat on his porch without saying much at all. He liked quiet afternoons. He would wind one of his old pocket watches, listen to its gentle ticking, and smile. People think time is something they own, he once told me. But really, time owns all of us. At the time, I thought he was simply sharing another one of his strange little lessons. Now I wish I had asked more questions. Grandpa collected old watches. Not expensive ones. Most were scratched. Some had cracked glass. Others no longer worked. He kept them inside a dusty wooden cabinet in his workshop. Every birthday, one of my cousins joked about throwing the collection away. Nobody wants those old things, my cousin Derek laughed one summer. They belong in a museum, another cousin, Melissa, teased. No, Grandpa answered quietly while polishing a silver pocket watch. They belong exactly where they are. Nobody listened. Except me. Sometimes he let me hold one while he explained how every tiny gear depended on another. If one little piece disappears, he said, the whole watch forgets how to keep time. I always felt like he was talking about more than watches. A week after the funeral, our entire family gathered inside the office of Grandpa's lawyer. The room smelled like fresh coffee and old books. Everyone tried to act patient. Nobody really was. Derek whispered to his brother, I already picked out the sports car I'm buying. Melissa grinned. I heard Grandpa had over $3 million. Across the room, Aunt Linda smiled without looking at anyone. Even before the will was opened, people were silently spending money that wasn't theirs yet. I sat near the window. I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about Grandpa's empty porch. About how quiet the house would feel now. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Mr. Walter Brooks left detailed instructions. Every conversation stopped. One by one, names were called. My oldest cousin inherited Grandpa's vacation cabin. Another cousin received investment accounts. Melissa received a luxury sports car Grandpa had secretly purchased years earlier. Derek received another one. Someone gasped. Someone actually clapped. Then came jewelry. Savings accounts. Rare coins. Land outside the city. Each announcement made the room louder. People smiled wider. Phones appeared as cousins secretly searched the value of everything they had just inherited. Finally, the lawyer looked at me. And to his granddaughter, Elena Brooks. The room became quiet. Mr. Brooks leaves his complete collection of antique watches. Silence. Then Derek laughed. It started as a chuckle. Soon everyone joined him. The broken watches, he asked. Melissa covered her mouth while trying not to laugh. Seriously? Someone whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Guess Grandpa forgot about her. Another cousin shook his head. I would have rather gotten nothing. Heat rushed into my face. I looked down at my hands. The same hands Grandpa had trusted to hold those old watches. The lawyer slid a small brass key across the table. This opens the cabinet in his workshop. I picked it up. It felt strangely heavy. Outside the office, Derek walked past me, spinning the keys to his brand new sports car around one finger. Want to trade? He joked. I'll even let you keep one broken watch. Everyone laughed again. I didn't answer. I simply placed the brass key into my pocket. As I walked toward Grandpa's empty house that evening, I kept hearing his calm voice inside my head. People think time is something they own. The sun was beginning to set when I unlocked the workshop door. Dust floated through the warm light. Everything was exactly where Grandpa had left it. His tools. His chair. His magnifying glass. And against the far wall, the old wooden cabinet. I slid the brass key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. When I slowly opened the cabinet doors, dozens of old watches stared back at me. But one of them looked different. Behind it, barely visible in the shadows, I noticed what seemed to be the edge of a hidden wooden panel. And suddenly, I realized Grandpa hadn't left my watch at all. He had left me a mystery. I stood in Grandpa Walter's workshop for a long moment without moving. The hidden wooden panel was so small that I almost missed it. My heart beat faster. Grandpa had never liked secrets unless they had a good reason. If he had hidden something here, he wanted the right person to find it. I reached into the cabinet and carefully lifted out the watch that covered the corner of the panel. It was the silver pocket watch he had shown me many times. The glass was scratched, and the chain was worn smooth from years of being held. As soon as I removed it, I saw a tiny brass button hidden in the wood. I never noticed that before, I whispered. I pressed it. With a soft click, the panel slid open. Inside was a narrow space holding a folded envelope. Nothing else. The paper had turned yellow with age, but my name was written across the front in Grandpa's neat handwriting. For Elena. Open this only after the will is read. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. My dear Elena, it began. If you are reading this, then everything happened exactly as I expected. I frowned. Expected? You probably watched our family argue over money before they even finished missing me. That is not your fault, and it is not mine. Greed has a way of making people forget who they really are. A lump formed in my throat. It sounded exactly like Grandpa. You may wonder why I gave you the watches instead of something that looks valuable. The answer is simple. These watches are worth far more than anyone in our family believes. I looked around the cabinet again. Every shelf was filled with old clocks, pocket watches, and wristwatches. They still looked ordinary. Don't sell them. Don't give them away. Examine every single one carefully. Time always keeps its secrets, until the right person is patient enough to listen. The letter ended with only one more sentence. Trust no one until you understand what you have. I read those words 3 times. Then I folded the letter and slipped it safely into my purse. Outside, evening had turned into night. The workshop suddenly felt different. Not scary. Important. I gently picked up the first pocket watch. It was heavier than I remembered. I turned it over. Nothing unusual. I opened the cover. The hands were frozen at 4:15. I wound it carefully. Tick. 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 It still worked. I smiled. Grandpa would have liked that. For the next 2 hours, I examined watch after watch. Some worked. Some didn't. Some had tiny names carved inside. Others had dates that went back more than 80 years. But I found nothing unusual. I rubbed my tired eyes. Maybe I'm looking for the wrong thing. Just then my phone buzzed. It was my cousin Melissa. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Hello? Her cheerful voice sounded different from earlier. So, have you sold those old watches yet? No. You should. They're just collecting dust. I'm keeping them. There was a short silence. Really? Why? I promised Grandpa I'd take care of them. That wasn't completely true, but it felt right. Melissa laughed softly. You've always been sentimental. Before hanging up, she added something strange. Oh. Derek wanted to know if there were any papers hidden in the cabinet. I froze. What papers? I don't know. He was just asking. The call ended. I stared at the phone. How did Derek know about hidden papers? No one had seen the secret compartment. No one except me. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. The next morning, I returned to the workshop carrying a notebook. If Grandpa wanted me to inspect every watch, I would do it properly. I placed each one on the workbench. Numbered it. Wrote down its color. Its size. Its condition. After nearly an hour, I reached an old brass pocket watch with a picture of an oak tree carved into the back. The carving felt rough under my thumb. Then I noticed something odd. The tree trunk could move. Very gently, I twisted it. Click. The back of the watch opened in a way I had never seen before. Hidden inside was a tiny rolled piece of paper. I carefully pulled it out. It was no bigger than my little finger. Unrolling it slowly, I found only a few words written in Grandpa's handwriting. Number 7 knows the truth. I blinked. Number 7? I looked around the table. 7 what? 7 watches? 7 drawers? 7 shelves? I hurriedly counted the watches I had already examined. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 7th was an old gold-colored wristwatch with a cracked leather strap. I picked it up. It looked completely ordinary. Still, Grandpa had never written anything without a reason. I searched every inch of it. Nothing. Then I remembered something he had once taught me. Never force a watch, he used to say. If it opens the right way, it opens gently. I pressed lightly on the crystal instead of pulling the back. A tiny compartment popped open. Inside was another folded note. But this one held more than a message. Tucked beside the paper was a tiny brass key. Smaller than my house key. Smaller even than the key Grandpa had left in the lawyer's office. My pulse raced as I unfolded the second note. It contained only one sentence. This key opens the first door, but not in this house. I turned the tiny brass key over in my hand again and again. It was so small that it could fit on the tip of my finger. I had never seen it before. Grandpa's note echoed in my mind. This key opens the first door, but not in this house. I looked around the workshop one more time, hoping something would suddenly make sense. Nothing did. The watches sat quietly on the table, their faces frozen at different times. It felt as if they were waiting for me to solve a puzzle Grandpa had spent years creating. I slipped the little key into my pocket beside the larger brass key. If it's not for this house, I whispered, then where does it belong? Just then, another memory came back to me. A few months before Grandpa passed away, I had driven him to the old train station on the edge of town. The station had been closed for years, but Grandpa insisted on stopping there. He had smiled as he looked across the empty tracks. Some places hold more than memories, he had said. Sometimes they hold promises. At the time, I thought he was remembering his childhood. Now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I drove to the old station. The building looked older than I remembered. Paint peeled from the walls, weeds pushed through cracks in the sidewalk, and the platform was almost hidden by tall grass. Only one small office remained standing. The front door was locked. I walked around the building slowly. Nothing. No hidden box. No secret compartment. No keyhole that matched the tiny key. I was about to leave when an elderly man stepped out from behind the station carrying a broom. "Can I help you?" he asked kindly. "I'm looking for something my grandfather may have left here." "What was his name?" "Walter Brooks." The man's face brightened. "Walter? I knew him for 40 years. You did?" "He repaired watches for half the town. Best watchmaker I ever met." I smiled. "That's him." The man nodded toward the old office. "He rented the storage room in the back for many years." I didn't know that. Most people didn't. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring of keys. "I've been keeping an eye on the place since it closed." My heart skipped. There's a storage room?" He unlocked a weathered wooden door hidden behind the office. Dust filled the air as it creaked open. The room was tiny. Just a table. An old shelf. Several wooden boxes. Nothing looked valuable. "I'll leave you alone," the caretaker said with a gentle smile. Walter always said one day someone honest would come looking. As soon as he left, I noticed something unusual. There were 7 small lockboxes lined up on the shelf. Each had a number painted on the front. 1, 2, 3. All the way to 7. I reached for box number 1. Its tiny lock matched the brass key perfectly. Click. The lid opened. Inside rested another antique pocket watch wrapped in soft blue cloth. Beneath it lay a folded document. I carefully opened the paper. It wasn't a deed. It wasn't a will. It was a handwritten list. Across the top, Grandpa had written, "The Keepers of Time." Below that were 7 names. Some I recognized. Others I didn't. Beside each name was the year they had received one special watch from Grandpa. The final name had no year beside it. It simply read, Elena Brooks. I stared at it in disbelief. Grandpa hadn't chosen me at the last minute. He had planned this for years. Under the list was another note. Every keeper protects one piece of the truth. Find the others before anyone else does. I folded the paper carefully. 7 keepers. 7 watches. 7 pieces of one secret. Before I could think any further, I heard footsteps outside. Several footsteps. Voices. Then one familiar laugh. Derek. I quickly closed the lockbox and slipped Grandpa's papers into my bag. The storage room door suddenly opened. "There she is," Derek said with a wide grin. Melissa stood beside him. "So," she said sweetly, "we figured you'd come here." I frowned. "How did you know I was here?" Derek shrugged. "You've been acting strange ever since the will." "I just wanted to remember Grandpa." "Sure," Derek replied, looking around the room. "Or maybe you're looking for something valuable." His eyes landed on the open shelf. 7 numbered boxes. His smile faded. "What's inside those?" "Old things," I answered calmly. He stepped closer. "I think Grandpa forgot to mention these during the reading of the will." Melissa folded her arms. "If they're part of Grandpa's estate, they belong to all of us." I remembered Grandpa's warning. Trust no one until you understand what you have. So I smiled politely. I only found empty boxes. Derek narrowed his eyes. "I don't believe you." Neither did Melissa. As they searched the dusty room, I quietly backed toward the door, my purse held tightly against my side. Inside it rested Grandpa's list. The first hidden watch. And the beginning of a secret my cousins were clearly desperate to find. For the first time, I realized this was no longer just a family mystery. It had become a race. For a second, nobody moved. Derek stood near the shelf with his hands in his pockets. Melissa slowly looked around the dusty storage room, her eyes stopping on every box as if she expected gold to jump out. I forced myself to stay calm. "If you're done looking around," I said, "I'm leaving." Derek smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not so fast." He walked over to box number 1 and lifted the lid. It was empty. He checked the second box. Empty. Then the third. Still empty. One by one, he opened all 7 boxes. Each one held nothing except a little dust. He slammed the last lid shut. "That's impossible." Melissa crossed her arms. "So you got here before us?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I replied. Derek stepped closer. "You found something?" "No." "Then why are you hiding your purse behind your back?" I looked down without thinking. That tiny mistake was enough. His grin grew wider. I knew it. Before he could reach for my bag, the old caretaker appeared in the doorway. "Is everything all right here?" he asked. Derek quickly stepped back. "We're just looking around." The caretaker looked at each of us for a moment. "This building belongs to the town now. If you're finished, I'd appreciate everyone leaving." His voice was calm, but firm. Derek muttered something under his breath. Melissa sighed dramatically. "Fine." As they walked past me, Derek leaned close enough that only I could hear him. "If Grandpa hid something valuable, I'll find it." Then they climbed into Derek's shiny red sports car and sped away. I waited until the sound of the engine disappeared before letting out a long breath. The caretaker smiled kindly. "Walter always said patience beats greed." "You knew he left these boxes?" He nodded. "I promised not to open them." "You never looked inside?" "Not once." I believed him. Grandpa had trusted this man for a reason. Before leaving, I asked one more question. "Do you know any of the names on this list?" I carefully showed him the paper titled The Keepers of Time. His eyebrows lifted. "I know one." He pointed to the second name. Margaret Ellis. She used to own the little clock shop on Maple Street. Used to. She retired years ago. "Do you know where she lives?" He smiled. "Only a few blocks from here." My heart raced. Maybe this was the next piece of Grandpa's puzzle. After thanking him, I drove across town. Margaret Ellis lived in a small blue house with white flowers growing beside the front porch. An old wind chime gently rang above the door. I knocked. A tiny woman with silver hair answered almost immediately. "Can I help you?" "My name is Elena Brooks." The moment she heard Grandpa's last name, her eyes became soft. "Walter's granddaughter?" "Yes." She smiled sadly. "I've been wondering when you'd come." That surprised me. "You were expecting me?" "Eventually." She invited me inside. Every wall of her living room was covered with clocks. Some were large. Some were tiny. Every one of them ticked together. The sound filled the room like quiet music. Margaret poured 2 cups of tea before speaking again. "Walter chose you, didn't he?" I nodded. "He left me his watches." She smiled. "Then he made the right choice." I carefully placed Grandpa's list on the table. "You were one of the keepers of time." She looked at the paper for several seconds. "I haven't seen this in over 20 years. What does it mean?" Instead of answering, she walked to an old bookshelf. From the top shelf, she removed a beautiful gold pocket watch. It looked much newer than Grandpa's. She handed it to me. "Open the back." I did. Inside was a tiny folded paper, just like the one I had found. It contained only 4 words. "Truth survives patient hearts." I looked up. "So every keeper has one message?" Margaret nodded. 7 watches. 7 messages. What happens when they're all together? She smiled gently. Walter never told me. Before I could ask another question, someone knocked loudly on the front door. 3 sharp knocks. Margaret frowned. That's strange. She walked toward the entrance. Through the window, I saw Derek standing outside. Melissa was beside him. My stomach tightened. How had they followed me again? Margaret opened the door only a few inches. Can I help you? Derek smiled politely. We're looking for our cousin. I don't know what you mean. We saw her car. His eyes searched past Margaret and landed on me. There you are. He stepped forward, but Margaret didn't move. You weren't invited. Derek laughed. We're family. Margaret answered quietly. Families should protect each other, not chase each other. For the first time since Grandpa's funeral, Derek looked embarrassed. Only for a second. Then he smiled again. We only came to ask Elena one question. I walked to the doorway. What is it? His expression became serious. Did Grandpa ever tell you about the old land by Miller's Creek? I blinked. No. Melissa looked disappointed. I guess she really doesn't know. They exchanged a quick glance. A glance that lasted less than a second. But it told me everything. They weren't chasing the watches anymore. They were searching for something much bigger. And somehow, Grandpa's old collection was leading straight to it. After Derek and Melissa drove away, Margaret slowly closed the front door. The little brass bell above it gave one soft ring. She looked at me with worried eyes. They found you much faster than I expected. So they really are searching for something, I said. Margaret nodded. They'd been asking questions around town for weeks. Weeks? They came to see me before your grandfather's funeral. That surprised me. What did they ask? They wanted to know if Walter ever trusted me with important papers. I felt a chill. They already knew Grandpa had hidden something. I believe so. Margaret walked back to the table and carefully picked up her gold pocket watch. Your grandfather knew greed would grow after he was gone. That's why he made the puzzle. She smiled gently. Walter didn't create this puzzle to make anyone rich. Then why? She looked at the ticking clocks covering her walls. To make sure the truth reached the right hands. Those words stayed in my mind all afternoon. Before I left, Margaret handed me a folded map. It looked old enough to have belonged to Grandpa. On it, several places around town were circled with red ink. One circle surrounded the old train station. Another marked Margaret's house. The last circle rested beside a narrow stream outside town. Written beside it were 2 words. Miller's Creek. The same place Derek had mentioned. I think this belongs to you now, Margaret said. Did Grandpa leave it? He asked me to pass it to the next keeper. I carefully folded the map and placed it inside my bag with the other notes. As I drove toward Miller's Creek, dark clouds gathered overhead. The narrow road twisted through quiet fields before ending near a small wooden bridge. I stepped out of the car. The only sounds were birds singing and water flowing over smooth rocks. Nothing looked unusual. No buildings. No boxes. No signs. Just trees and grass. I unfolded Grandpa's map again. A tiny X had been drawn near the largest oak tree beside the creek. I walked toward it. The oak was enormous. Its branches stretched across the water like giant arms. At its base stood an old stone bench. I brushed away leaves and dirt. Carved into the stone were tiny letters. Every family has roots. Some are buried deeper than others. I traced the words with my fingers. Grandpa had carved them himself. Then I noticed something else. One loose stone beneath the bench. It moved when I pushed it. Behind it rested a small metal box. It was locked. My heart raced. I searched my pocket. The tiny brass key from watch number 7 was still there. I slid it into the lock. Click. The lid opened. Inside rested another antique watch wrapped in soft cloth. Beneath it lay a folded envelope. This one was much thicker than the others. Across the front Grandpa had written, "Do not open until you find 3 watches." I counted quickly. The workshop watch. Margaret's watch. Now this one. 3. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. It showed Grandpa standing beside another man in front of a large piece of land. Both men were smiling. On the back Grandpa had written, "Partners. Equal owners. 1986. There was also a folded deed. Not the complete deed. Only half of one. Across the bottom someone had torn the page straight down the middle. I stared at it. Half a deed? Then I found another note. The land was never stolen by strangers. It was taken by someone carrying our family name. I stopped breathing for a second. Someone in our own family? Grandpa had believed that all along. The note continued. The watches hold the proof. Gather every message before you reveal the truth. I carefully returned everything to the envelope. Just then, gravel crunched behind me. A black SUV pulled onto the dirt road. It wasn't Derek's sports car. 2 men stepped out. They wore dark suits. One of them carried a leather folder. "Excuse me," the taller man called. "Are you Elena Brooks?" "Yes. My name is Samuel Pierce." He held out a business card. "I'm an attorney." I looked at the card but didn't take it. "What do you want?" "I worked with your grandfather many years ago." That caught my attention. "He asked me to find you, if anyone reached Miller's Creek first." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Samuel glanced toward the open metal box beside the bench. "I see you found it. How did you know it was here?" "Because I helped Walter hide it." Before I could answer, another engine roared down the dirt road. This time I recognized it immediately. Derek's bright red sports car. It stopped so suddenly that dust filled the air. Derek jumped out before the car had completely stopped. His eyes locked onto the open box in my hands. For the first time since all this began, he wasn't smiling. He looked frightened. Then he shouted words that made everyone freeze. "Don't let her read the rest." Samuel Pierce slowly turned toward Derek. His face became very serious. "So," the lawyer said quietly, "you already know what your father did." The air around Miller's Creek suddenly felt very still. No one spoke for several seconds. Derek stared at Samuel Pierce with wide eyes. Samuel folded his arms. "So," he repeated calmly, "you already know what your father did." Derek swallowed hard. I don't know what you're talking about." Samuel didn't argue. Instead, he looked at me. "Elena, your grandfather asked me to stay quiet until you found the 3rd watch. Now it's time you learn part of the truth." I nodded slowly. "Please tell me." Samuel pointed to the torn deed in my hands. 40 years ago, your grandfather and another man bought this land together. They were equal partners." "The man in the photograph?" "Yes. His name was Henry Lawson. They planned to build a nature center for children and families. It wasn't meant to make anyone rich. It was meant to help the town." I smiled at the old picture. "That sounds like Grandpa." Samuel's face grew serious again. But before they could finish the project, important papers disappeared. "The deed?" "Part of it." I looked down at the torn document. "So no one could prove who owned the land." "Exactly." "What happened then?" Samuel sighed. People assumed Henry owned it alone. After he passed away, the land was sold to another company for far less than it was worth. I frowned. But Grandpa never tried to stop it. He did. Samuel looked toward Derek. Unfortunately, someone inside the family hid the missing papers. My heart beat faster. Who? Before Samuel could answer, Derek interrupted. You can't prove anything. Samuel remained calm. No. Not yet. Derek took one step backward. My dad told me Grandpa gave the land away. Samuel shook his head. That's what your father wanted everyone to believe. I stared at Derek. You knew about this? His shoulders dropped. I only knew pieces. What pieces? He rubbed the back of his neck. When I was 14, I heard my dad arguing with Grandpa. What were they arguing about? The land. Derek's voice became quieter. Grandpa kept saying, give it back before it's too late. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. And your dad? He said nobody would ever find the rest of the deed. The creek flowed quietly beside us. Even the birds seemed silent now. Samuel opened his leather folder. Inside were copies of old letters. He handed me one. It was written by Grandpa. If anything happens to me before the truth is known, the watches will finish what I started. Another letter was from Henry Lawson. Walter is the most honest man I have ever known. I trust him with everything. I carefully folded both letters. They believed someone would eventually uncover the truth. Samuel smiled. Your grandfather believed you would. Just then, Melissa stepped out of Derek's car. She looked confused. Derek, what's going on? He didn't answer. She turned to me. Please tell me none of this is true. I don't know everything yet. She looked at Samuel. Did my father really hide those papers? Samuel spoke gently. I don't know if he acted alone. Melissa covered her mouth. No. For the first time since Grandpa's funeral, she looked truly upset. Not because of money. Because she realized her father might have betrayed his own father. Samuel pointed toward the envelope I had found. There should be another note inside. I checked again. He was right. A smaller folded page had slipped beneath the photograph. I opened it carefully. Grandpa's handwriting filled only a few lines. If you have reached this point, then you already know someone in our family chose greed over honesty. Do not accuse anyone until every piece is found. The final proof is hidden where every hour was announced. I read the last sentence twice. The final proof is hidden where every hour was announced. What does that mean? Melissa asked. Samuel smiled. I think Walter left one final riddle. Derek suddenly looked nervous again. No. Everyone looked at him. No, what? I asked. He shook his head quickly. It can't be the old clock tower. Samuel's eyes widened. You remember. Derek closed his eyes. When I was little, Grandpa took me there once. He said someday the tower would tell the truth. Melissa stared at him. You never told anyone. I forgot, or maybe I wanted to forget. Samuel looked toward the town in the distance. The old clock tower stood above the rooftops, its large face visible even from Miller's Creek. It hasn't worked in years, I said. Samuel smiled. Perhaps the clock isn't what's important. I carefully placed the torn deed, the photograph, and Grandpa's letters back into the envelope. 3 watches had already revealed more than I ever imagined. But Grandpa's greatest secret was still waiting. And somehow, I knew the silent clock tower in the middle of town had been guarding it for decades. The old clock tower stood in the center of town like a giant that had fallen asleep. When I was a little girl, its bell rang every hour. People used to set their watches by it. Now the hands were frozen at exactly 12 o'clock. Pigeons perched along the roof, and vines climbed the stone walls. Most people walked past it without even looking up. But Grandpa had looked at it differently. He once told me, "A clock can stop ticking, Elena. That doesn't mean time stops telling the truth." At the time, I had smiled without understanding. Now those words felt like another clue. Samuel parked his car beside the small town library, which stood across from the tower. Derek and Melissa followed behind us in silence. Neither of them argued anymore. The truth had become too heavy for anyone to joke about. The front gate to the tower was locked with a rusty chain. Samuel reached into his briefcase. I hoped I wouldn't need this. He held up an old iron key. "Your grandfather gave it to me nearly 15 years ago. You've had that all this time?" I asked. "He told me only one person should use it." He smiled gently. "And today, that person is you." He placed the key in my hand. It felt cold and surprisingly heavy. I unlocked the gate. The chain dropped to the ground with a loud clatter. Inside, a narrow staircase wound upward through the tower. Dust covered every step. The air smelled of old wood and stone. We climbed slowly. At the top, the giant clock mechanism filled most of the room. Huge gears rested silently. Thick beams crossed the ceiling. Sunlight streamed through the clock face, making floating dust sparkle like tiny stars. "It's beautiful," Melissa whispered. Samuel nodded. "Your grandfather helped repair this clock when he was young." I walked around the room carefully. There were old tools. Broken wooden crates. A workbench. Nothing looked unusual. Then I remembered Grandpa's favorite lesson. If one little piece disappears, the whole watch forgets how to keep time. I looked at the giant clock again. One gear seemed different from the others. It was newer. Cleaner. Almost as if it had been replaced. I stepped closer. Instead of turning, the gear wobbled slightly. I pressed against it. Click. A hidden panel opened inside the clock. Everyone gasped. Inside rested a long wooden box. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. Grandpa's name was carved into the lid. Below it were 3 simple words. "For honest hearts." Slowly, I opened the box. Inside lay 4 antique watches. Together with the 3 already found, there were now 7. Each one rested in its own velvet space. Beneath them was a thick envelope. I looked at Samuel. He nodded. "It's time." I broke the seal. Inside were several papers. The first was the missing half of the land deed. The torn edges matched perfectly with the piece I already carried. I carefully placed them together. The paper became whole again. Samuel smiled. Now the ownership can finally be proven. The second document was even more surprising. It listed every time Grandpa had tried to return the land to its proper owners. Letters. Meetings. Legal requests. Every attempt had been refused. At the bottom was one final page. It contained only a few paragraphs. I recognized Grandpa's handwriting immediately. "If you are reading this, then my watches have done exactly what I hoped they would. I never cared about expensive cars, large houses, or money sitting in a bank. Character is worth more than all of those things together." I felt tears filling my eyes. He continued. "Some members of our family believed I rewarded people with wealth. I was rewarded with something much more important." I kept reading. "Sports cars, jewelry, and savings were never my greatest gifts. Those things lose value every year. The truth never does." The room became completely silent. Even Derek lowered his head. The last page explained everything. Grandpa had left the flashy inheritance to the greedy family members because he knew they would reveal their true character while fighting over it. The watches had been his real inheritance. Not because they were valuable themselves. But because they protected the truth until someone patient, honest, and kind found every piece. Melissa quietly wiped away a tear. I laughed at those watches. So did I, Derek admitted softly. Neither of them looked proud anymore. Samuel carefully gathered the restored deed. Tomorrow morning, he said, we'll present these papers to the court. I nodded. The mystery was finally solved. The hidden compartments. The keepers of time. The torn deed. Every clue had led here. But Grandpa's greatest gift wasn't the land. It was giving our family one last chance to choose honesty over greed. Whether everyone would make that choice. We were about to find out. The next morning, I hardly slept. I kept thinking about Grandpa's words. Character is worth more than money. As the sun rose, I met Samuel outside the county courthouse. The old building looked serious with its tall stone columns and wide front steps. Melissa arrived a few minutes later. She looked tired. I talked to my father last night, she said quietly. What happened? He admitted he knew about the missing deed. My heart sank. But he says he didn't steal it. Samuel nodded. Today we'll hear everyone's side. A few minutes later, Derek walked toward us. He wasn't driving his bright red sports car. Instead, he came on foot. I sold it this morning, he said before anyone asked. Melissa looked surprised. You already sold it? He nodded. I don't want it anymore. Nobody knew what to say. Soon, we entered the courthouse together. Inside, Grandpa's brother, Uncle Richard, was already waiting. His face turned pale when he saw the restored deed in Samuel's hands. What is that? He asked. Samuel answered calmly. The truth. Everyone took their seats. A county judge listened carefully while Samuel explained everything. He showed the torn deed. The matching half from the clock tower. Grandpa's letters. Henry Lawson's letter. The photograph. Finally, he placed the 7 antique watches on the table. The courtroom became completely silent. Samuel spoke clearly. Walter Brooks didn't hide these items to create a treasure hunt. He hid them because he feared the truth would disappear. The judge slowly examined every document. Then he looked toward Uncle Richard. Do you wish to respond? For a long moment, Uncle Richard stared at the floor. Finally, he stood. His shoulders looked smaller than I had ever seen them. I never meant for it to go this far. No one interrupted. He took a deep breath. Years ago, Walter and Henry owned that land together. After Henry died, I learned the land might become valuable. He closed his eyes. I thought, if the deed disappeared, nobody could prove Walter still owned half. Melissa quietly began to cry. I kept telling myself I would fix it later, Uncle Richard continued. But later became years. Then decades. He looked at me. Your grandfather asked me again and again to return the papers. I was ashamed. So I kept lying. The room stayed silent. The judge spoke gently. Mr. Richard Brooks, honesty delayed is still dishonesty. Uncle Richard nodded. I know. The court accepted the restored deed. Since Grandpa and Henry Lawson had been equal owners, the land legally belonged to both families again. But something unexpected happened next. Henry Lawson's daughter stood up. She had been quietly listening from the back of the courtroom. She smiled at me. My father always believed Walter would protect our family. She looked toward Samuel. What happens now? Samuel answered, the land belongs to both families equally. She smiled. Then let's honor their original dream. Everyone looked at her. We should build the nature center they planned. For the first time that day, I smiled. It felt exactly like something Grandpa would have wanted. Even Uncle Richard nodded through his tears. I'll help pay for it. The judge approved the agreement. Months passed. The old field beside Miller's Creek slowly changed. Workers planted trees. Children's walking paths were built. A small learning center opened with pictures of birds, flowers, and local history. Near the entrance stood a bronze statue. Not of a rich man. Not a businessman. Just Grandpa Walter sitting in his favorite chair, holding one of his old pocket watches. At the bottom of the statue were the words he had told me so many times. Time always tells the truth. The 7 watches were placed inside a glass display at the nature center. Each one had a small sign explaining how patience, honesty, and kindness had protected an important piece of history. People came from nearby towns just to see them. Children loved hearing the story. Parents smiled as they read Grandpa's letters. As for Derek, he volunteered at the nature center every Saturday. He admitted he couldn't change the past. But he could choose what kind of person he wanted to become. Melissa helped organize programs for local schools. She often laughed at herself. I used to think old watches were worthless. Now she reminded every child who visited, never judge something by how shiny it looks. Uncle Richard spent many afternoons sitting alone beneath the big oak tree at Miller's Creek. He couldn't erase his mistakes. But he stopped making new ones. As for me, I kept Grandpa's favorite silver pocket watch. Not because it was expensive. It wasn't. Not because it was rare. It wasn't. I kept it because every tick reminded me of the greatest lesson Grandpa ever taught. Real wealth isn't measured by sports cars, fancy jewelry, or large bank accounts. Real wealth is having people trust your heart when nobody is watching. Whenever children visit the nature center and ask why Grandpa left me only old watches while everyone else received expensive gifts, I simply smile. Then I tell them the same answer Grandpa would have given. Because the greatest inheritance isn't something you spend. It's the truth you choose to protect. Before you go, I'd love to hear your opinion. If you were Elena, after everyone laughed because you inherited only a box of old watches while your cousins drove away in luxury sports cars, would you have searched for the truth like she did? Or would you have walked away and forgotten about it all? And what do you think about Derek, Melissa, and Uncle Richard? Do you believe they truly changed after learning Grandpa's final lesson, or was it simply too late? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd genuinely love to hear what you would have done. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe for more emotional family dramas filled with shocking betrayals, hidden secrets, unforgettable twists, and well-earned justice. Remember, the most valuable inheritance isn't money or expensive gifts, it's the truth, the values, and the character we choose to protect. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. The end of the story.